Can you hear me? How fun. Looks like we were having some technical excitement going on. Is the volume working now too? Just want to make sure all the pieces are working. I'm not sure what it was. I'm not sure if it was the browser, but kind of happened a few times. So, okay. Apologies about the technical stuff, but it looks like it's working at least a little bit. So we'll just see if people were dissuaded. Here's what I'm going to do. In the meantime, we'll just see if people show. Makes sense why people were coming and going because they couldn't see or hear. I'm going to see if I can just share this really quickly. Okay, so that's funny. I was giving everybody a rundown of the new cards and the old cards, and no one could even hear or see. That is funny. Okay. Yeah, with all the links and stuff too, so it might be a little bit messy. People might be confused on where to go. If that's the case, we can just do it with 6. Does anybody have a deck of cards? So these are the new ones that Angelo has. Not all of them are shiny like this. And then these are the originals right here. And basically, the way we do this, it's been a while since we've done some lives. You can just ask a question. We can get into that. And then we'll pull a card. You can actually even choose which deck. You can choose the original or the Angelo deck. So just want to make sure that people can still hear and see. Does anybody have a question they want to get into? Just make sure. Okay. And I know there was a bunch of people coming that probably went to the old link, and because that one didn't work, there's probably going to be a little bit of confusion. So what's new? How's the path going? Oh, you don't need rapid questions. I understand. 4 a.m. Man. 4 a.m. Wow. Is that how the time zone differs in Australia? So maybe I wonder if there was a way to do these a little later, if that would be more effective for people globally. So 6 a.m. I guess would be 2 p.m. our time. That could be suitable, but then that would be 4 p.m. Eastern time. Here, let's see if I can do a prompt. I'm kind of playing with this a little bit too. I'm going to do this one and see if... I wonder if that did anything. Okay, so yeah, as these lives tend to go, we treat it like a satsang, just to be clear. Of course, it's not quite like a Zoom satsang. So, of course, you'll be mostly anonymous except for in the chat, but hopefully that's not too big of a deal. Some people are really sensitive with privacy. After you ask a question, and then we will basically from there choose a Koan card, and you can choose from either deck today. This is the Angelo deck, and this is the original deck. I guess we can even start with one just to prime it, because it seems like maybe there's a little tentativeness. So let's pick one. This one's really good. This one's an excellent pointer, mainly because it seems to be primarily where most of the pointings go around perception of suffering. This one says, the cure for the pain is within the pain. It's actually a Rumi quote. It tells you where to look. It's a kind of an interesting experience that the perception of creating a context by moving away from something somehow is what's creating that experience. In other words, if we're pursuing something away from something else, wherever that gap or that vacuum is that we're attempting to create persists, mainly because this reality doesn't play into our perception. Our perception is contained. And so this reality presents itself as a whole. Whatever it is, and really that's it. And it seems like this mind that we have is constantly playing a game of somehow attempting to bend reality. And maybe for the majority of our lives, it seems like that's true. Yet it seems like suffering is this one experience where it's like gravity, for instance. There's a really good book out there that can be a great read if you're into this type of reading. It's called Ishmael by an author named Daniel Quinn. And in the book, he has a quote that if you jump off a cliff, you may have the illusion of flying. That is, until you hit the ground. It reminds me of another quote that kind of Terence McKenna. I'm going to read it exactly so I don't butcher it. It was on the Instagram page today. It says, "The truth does not require your participation in order to exist. Bullshit does." That's it right there. It's like playing a game of bullshit all the time. We're somehow attempting to avoid fundamental aspects of reality. And really, I mean, we can get into some pretty interesting things when it comes to we can experience fourth dimensional object, I guess we can call it that, or maybe it's more of like a substance or a fabric. That is only in direct experience. It shows up as paradox. And it's really interesting because our perception of time is directly related to our evaluations and the perception itself of whatever is arising in experience. A way to put that is we have an arising experience in the five senses, and then something comes in to audit that experience. And in that auditing, it essentially is translating it. And in the translation, it loses information. Language is a great example of that. There is so much in language that cannot capture experience. In fact, if we look carefully at it, it's a really weak approximation for what is direct in experience. And sure, we can play with it and we can add a bunch of words and find nuances there, but it really is never quite captured in language. That's the same thing with thought. Thought cannot actually capture experience. What it does is it alters it and modifies it slightly so that it can fit its own framework. And so we could say that thoughts are essentially only serving thoughts, self-defining phenomena, self-referential phenomena. Yeah, so let's see. Reno says, it's weird that the card pulled. It seems that acceptance lies in where the no seems to arise. Yes, so that the paradoxes are pretty apparent here. And in fact, this is part of the oscillation that is encouraged, is because it does seem to be the essence of paradox. Part of the path that seems really crucial for all of us is to allow the oscillation, is to allow the thought to capture us, then to return, to play with what seems like opposing experiences constantly. And it seems maybe really all that is perceived limitations of experience. The mind is really good at creating assumptions and interpretations that give us a perceived limitation. I mean, even the identity itself is quite a limitation because it's limited in its scope of conclusion, in its scope of certainty. You know, I am a Pepsi guy. I'm a Coke guy. These things, it limits automatically. In fact, it must limit in order to fulfill its own criteria. That's interesting. So in order to oscillate and play in what seems like apparent extremes of direct experience, we start to see something firsthand that essentially violates those boundaries or those perceived limits. And in the violation of those perceived limits, this mind must adjust. And as it does, it tends to cease. It tends to become more quiet. That's part of the pointing here. So yeah, the the no seems to arise, and then we move into the no, and that's where acceptance is discovered. It seems quite that way. Something I noticed too is on the channel. It seems like the majority of people that come to watch and engage have had some sort of realization, an awakening. That does seem pretty clear. And really, that shapes the content. It's funny, but the experience is its own, we could just say its own arising condition. It's conditionless, but then it becomes form. It becomes born an experience, and that is met as an apparent expression or an apparent condition. And so the content of the channel is a direct reflection of the audience, just to make that really clear. So if there is a type of content that's showing up, it gives you kind of a barometer or a temperature of the types of interactions that are showing up there. It seems like the majority of people that come to engage have already had at least an experience that's something akin to Kensho. And really, I do my best, at least in this moment, it makes sense to say it this way. There's really no map, but that doesn't mean that maps have no use. What it essentially means is that to rely on a map or to become codependent or anything along those lines will eventually lead us right back into some sort of fixation identification. That'll lead into more no's. So there can be a loose map, and the Angelo map is something like this, that there's a Kensho, an awakening there, an initial awakening, and then that somehow leads into deeper realization. Let's see, Adyashanti kind of has a map too. I think he's actually mentioned a few, but one of his primary maps is one awakens in the mind, they awaken in the heart, and then they awaken in the gut. That is really kind of a very similar map, that there is a sense of expansion. It seems like Kensho, or the initial awakening, is essentially a head awakening. It's the best way to put it. And what that essentially means is that the head or the mind becomes less rigid, and it's a sudden realization. And in that that cessation of something, the rigidity or the auditing, there is a realization and a view in the senses that becomes rather clear. It becomes rather profound. And the reason that seems to lead to what we call deeper realization is because really this whole game seems to be played out between an imaginary interface. It's something that seems to be happening, a rising experience, a rising sensation, and the lamination of thought instantly in that auditing reflective experience. And somehow attention has become consumed with thought, or thought consumes attention, and there is some sort of shadow created there. To move into thought, we tend to create a shadow, at least perceptually, in sensation. Part of these pointings are to remind you that no matter what you do, you're always feeling anyway. So there really is no shadow, really. There's really nothing hidden, really. But as we start to pay attention, it seems like we have sudden intuitions around what's showing up. So it's something like that. I don't even know. All right. Who has a question? Who wants to ask something to get into? I mean, right now the poll says 80% of everyone feels like they've had an awakening. That says a lot about the channel. It seems like that is the majority of people that come to do one-on-one sessions as well. They feel like they've had some sort of awakening. And, awakening isn't really an event. So we can just kind of like start to pinpoint in on that. It's an ongoingness. It is a continuous insight, a continuous intuition. That's the best way to put it. Because if we rely on it as an event, we will quickly go back to sleep. This is the nature of conditioning and conditions. The Nissargadatta pointing, I am that, just the title of the book. It's just so good. You don't really even need to get into any further detail. It's good because it shows that whatever the arising experience is, that must be what this is. This must be the same. It's almost like a circuit being completed. We cannot have an experience unless it's us. We could just put it that way. All right, let's see. Does the act of asking recreate a knower and known? In terms of the questions or inquiry, do you mean like just asking a question in this regard? Because you can also ask who's asking the question. And then if you keep tracing that back, you might find that there was no one creating the impetus of asking, even if it seems like it's in response to something. How do you know to ask who's doing that? Can you locate the origination of asking or thought? But I think for some people it can. Sometimes it's almost like this iterative experience in thought. Something can be asked, and there's another reflective nature of that question, and then something else, and then something else that keeps attempting to. It's essentially attempting to verify itself with some sense of solidity, and so really could go either way. The act of asking can potentially recreate a knower and known, but it also is something maybe more in essence. It's something more in terms of engagement or immersion, just the play at hand, just the engagement. Something in participation has something to show us that really, when we're missing the mark, which the mind is excellent at doing, it seems like to be the ultimate overcorrector. For any of you who've ever driven in a snowy or icy environment, if you begin to lose control and you overcorrect while you're driving, it quickly can lead to a spin out. And that's actually what's seemingly happening in the mind, because it does seem like the system itself is non-intuitive. It bases itself on some sort of cause and effect narrative. It needs to have a reference point, and it needs to have that type of evidence. In other words, something that it is not, something that its information is not, something to compare and to contrast. I know that probably seems obvious, but really look closely at that. If we need some kind of externalized evidence as verification, we are often moving away from the experience at hand, right here in the present, right here, what's arising. And we tend to overshoot the mark. And so the way the identity tends to function is it's overcompensating. It's taking a bold move, and in doing so, there's like this nuance of experience that's right here that information must be cleaved, it must be shed, and it creates a sense of separation. So once again, kind of going back to that initial pointing around the necessity or the encouragement of oscillation, is as we move through this mysterious gap of what's essentially unborn between these two or more objects of experience. And remember, at minimum, the mind can only recognize two. The mind can never see one. It can only know one in contrast to something else. And so we're recognizing a system that is primarily binary. It is in itself dual, which actually isn't a problem, but to see it for what it is begins to reveal a lot more to the essence of all of this. So it overshoots the mark. If an example that can come up, for instance, somebody that has social anxiety, let's say, that energy that they're feeling in their body can quickly lead to further distortions. We can look at it like this. It begins to spread out, and then so it feels like anxiety, and there's a reaction to that, and there's a reaction schema and formation that seems to happen, and it seems to snowball outward. In other words, as it heads in an outward way of experience, externalization, it seems to amplify. And so the first thing is maybe some sort of minor soothing mechanism, but then that turns into thought, that turns into narrative, that turns into belief, and we have all this turbulence out here. And so someone that's experiencing social anxiety, a strategy around that felt experience, which is really all that's happening, just a feeling that's arising, is to become the center of attention. And we see this in some personality types. And a personality type is really just a conglomeration of strategies. And so that person becomes the center of attention, and they begin to become loud and boisterous, and they begin to continue stimulate the mind. And that gives them the sense of somehow being away from that buzzing intensity that seems to be arising here in the body, that feeling that we're calling anxiety. So then there's that. And then there's another strategy that can be implemented. Some people, when they're experiencing social anxiety and they're maybe at a social event, they will withdraw and become more and more quiet. So they move away this direction. It's really fundamentally the same sorts of behaviors arising there, for sure. Yet the way, what they are referring to is exactly the same. They are referring to a sense of discomfort, a sense of a no. There's a no here. I don't like this. And that is somehow shaping behavior. And what happens is there's these automatic reaction schemas and heuristics that play themselves out. And it feels like we're just sucked in and we're kind of doomed to react in such a way. But if you look closely and you're with sensation, you're with arising experience all the time, regularity of engagement, it becomes very apparent that whatever is showing up, there is complicity in these reactive behaviors. There is somehow a doubling down. And when you realize that you don't have to participate in what is essentially being offered to you, and it's a tangential energy, you start to recognize the essence of stillness. And stillness is the mark. It's right here. It's not shooting over one direction or another. And you probably can recognize many, many strategies around discomfort. People have all reactions that are pretty predictable, and that's the piece right there. So to touch intuition, we must constantly be willing to engage with the unknown, which basically looks like being surprised. It's an absolute fundamental willingness to be surprised all the time in direct experience. And that right there, that'll do it. Truly. Let's see. Dakota says, can I vote yes and no? Sure. Oh, you mean in the, I don't know. I don't know if it allows you to do that. When something claims ownership of the energy. Yeah, I mean, there are some nuances here, a sense of ownership of experience and all these things. But even then, we can still get closer to that. We don't have to actually entertain the wild swings. It's so simple. I know that doesn't make it easy. So there's plenty of empathy here. But the simplicity is clear. It must be attention to what seems apparent right now, and watch what the mind is saying about it and see how that's like attempting to lay out another context. And as soon as we start to recognize a context, you can always recognize how that is happening if you pay attention to conclusion. If there are any conclusions being formed, that means that there is another context or construct being developed right there. And it's persistent this way because that's what it's designed to do. It's actually not really a battle, although it does seem to be a battle along the way for a lot of us. So if currently you're in an experience where it feels like you are battling thought and battling the mind, that's part of the path. But then you will begin to see that we have a sense of empathy and compassion for this mind that actually is just doing what it's designed to do. It runs on its own. There's no one doing it. And in that, we start to realize we are no thought. We are no mind. And that is such a crucial insight in this entire path and awakening, that I am not my thoughts. That right there, that juicy piece right there, we begin to see this external, it's almost like an external energy of information. And we don't know where that information is coming from, but it's really clear that there's no one here generating this information. It's just being seemingly offered or suggested. Okay, that right there is a pretty big dose of freedom from thought. Because then we start to see the nature of how thoughts pile on and amplify themselves. It's like its own continuum. It's its own self-defining phenomena. And as they begin to compile and add to themselves, the distortions become more and more wild. It distorts every time it makes a facsimile of an experience. every time it makes an interpretation or an evaluation of something. Let's see. Oh, there is no voting yes and no. That's all right. I mean, it's not really a trick question. There, really, there's no point in going around claiming awakeness. Sometimes I'll have certain personalities that'll come do sessions, and one of the first questions I'll ask, "Are you awake?" And to be honest, I don't know. I don't know what that means actually. What I can speak to is what's seemingly showing up here, and that's it. It's not like a certificate we get, And actually, that reminds me, I did hear there's apparently some group out there that you can do like a short online course, and they'll give you a certificate of awakening. That's funny to me. That's hilarious. Let's see. Thought layering upon thought then seems to give it a density or a heaviness that isn't really there. Okay, so that's another piece there. Really, please look closely at the nature of cause and effect. Look closely at what seems to be causing and what seems to be affecting, and this will give you some insight, because the truth is, cause and effect, the way that the mind is seeing it, does not exist. It is being created in perception itself. That, to get really direct, all cause and all effect is present here. So this is the whole piece of the fourth dimensional shape. The most shocking aspect of this is, the only way I can put it into language is that all time is clearly here. All possibility of anything is actually here, but that doesn't mean that it's been born into form. We can feel something, we can sense something here. We can call it the everythingness or consciousness. I don't know what it is. And it doesn't necessarily appear as something that we would interact with as what we would just call like a solid object necessarily. But if there is an appearance of something, that is our point of engagement. This seems to be a non-formulaic approach, that anything that appears to be form, anything that appears to be referential, anything that appears to have density, separateness, anything that seems to stand out is a point of entry. That's it right there. Anything, everything, the most minor mundane experience, if something is standing out, that is your invitation. And there is such a crucial aspect of invitation in all this. If there is an invitation, there's only one answer. If there's an invitation, there's only one answer, and that is yes. And soon that happens so spontaneously, that happens so synchronistically, that there's no one here to even say yes. It's just instantaneous. That is what we could just call essentially like no self, no time. That's the collapsing of the sine wave. That's where the distortions have no distortion. That's where non-duality, reality, whatever it is, seems to become apparent. This shows up primarily in sensing. Sensing is really challenging, though, because we even still have constructs and compartments around senses. But what it gets us closer to a sense of intuition, because intuition is also this mysterious fabric of experience that is somehow always speaking to us like an intelligence. And if we listen closely enough, it's not guiding our behavior, because there's no one here that it's guiding, but it is revealing something constantly, so constantly that there's no avoiding it. It would be impossible. So now, looking fourth dimensionally, we have, one-dimensional things, everything appears as a line. Two-dimensional things, you have something drawn on a piece of paper. Third dimension of experience, which seems to have depth and time. And then when we start to experience something fourth dimensionally, we realize all possibilities are present. It just is obvious. It's like living in a superposition of experience. Somehow there is an observer and there is also no observer. Somehow there is directionality and no directionality. The paradox is apparent, and it's reconciling itself instantaneously. But to put that into words becomes essentially impossible, because to put it into words, it's almost like we're forcing a sense of mental imagination. But it cannot be imagined, because this mind is a two-dimensional, it is a binary experience. So something that exists fourth dimensionally, we must transition from a two-dimensional mind through a third dimension of experience, and then it becomes apparent. And it seems really biblical here. Like there's a metaphor, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. It's a pointing. The Father being the one that thinks it's in charge. The Father, the Son, the body of Christ given for you. It's talking about sensations, moving from mind through body to profound realization. But nobody has that realization. It just is. It just is. So that's the interesting thing about time, is it's not that there is no time. There is just no time in the way the mind sees it. Time is not a linear thing. Time is an experience of infinite potential somehow arising now in what seems like a limited experience. That's essentially what the fourth dimension is. And we tap into that somehow. We feel it. It becomes, it's almost like this feeling of overwhelm that just completely consumes everything. Let's see. Not to refute what you were saying about the heaviness, the thoughts are likely revealing a sense of heaviness. Heaviness is just a signal, by the way. Pain, discomfort, anything that seems to be a no is a signal of disassociation. It's a signal of not bringing awareness to something. That's all it is. Really, just give yourself the permission to look at it this way. Everything that feels uncomfortable is simply an invitation for wholeness. Oh, it's just a signal. There's no meaning. It doesn't kill anyone, doesn't hurt anyone, it's just a signal to saying, look here, it's getting your attention. And it's really elegant the way that seems to work. The longer in our relative reality that we seem to put something off, because that seems to be the game we're playing in this cause and effect narrative, the more apparent and intense the experience that we're attempting to avoid becomes. That's elegant. That's beautiful. It's like water. You create a splash and it levels itself out on its own. No doer there. That's what the feeling of heaviness or discomfort is. The more you avoid that, the more you are creating the distortion. You're basically participating in the wild swings of distortion. So this is the pointing. The cure for the pain is in the pain. Go to the discomfort and live there. And do not allow the mind to concern itself with an outcome, because an outcome has to be made up. There is no outcome. This is a continuum, a toroidal something that rolls in and out of itself, that goes beyond imagination, that is somehow here and gone. We are somehow the cat in the box, both alive and dead, with no observer, and neither, and not in the box and outside of the box, all possibility existing in what seems like actual. And here's what's really interesting is to have a full engagement with infinite possibility potential. We must move into our full engagement with what at least appears actual and what is always speaking to us, sensation, experience. To be fully engaged in that way, that actual reveals spontaneously infinite potential. What's the difference? The question eventually becomes mute. Time and space are essentially separation, ? Time and space do not exist in the way that the mind is perceiving it. Time and space are compartmentalized. They're compartmentalized experience through a two-dimensional mind. But you can feel the collapsing of time and space in the direct experience. It's the only way to describe that. So what we view as time and what we view as space are fundamentally a fabric, right? They're the same. So our perception of time as separation and space as separation, it's just being viewed as separate. But see, that's what the mind does. It can pick anything that it can potentially experience, and it will create a sense of separation there. This is why we have a sense of linear time, that there's a past that somehow hits a future, or a present that somehow hits a future. But if you actually look really closely at time, the way we experience even linear time, there's a lot of fooling going on there. That past, like present itself, actually isn't, it doesn't have a breadth. If we sit in the mind and we consider all the memories and things that seem to show up, past has this kind of length to it. We can feel this way. But present is like this razor thin, like nothing, because really what it is past being butt up against with a potential future. We actually, if we're not looking closely, we're not actually existing in any presence. That's how the mind overshoots the mark. But fundamentally, that's just a mind that cannot perceive intuitively that there is only this eternal now, that there is no reference point. It has to create that reference point through a memory and a viewpoint and a perception, the essence of observation, the observer. So the way we perceive time, the way it's being kind of chopped up, seems to be primarily what the mind is doing. The way it's chopping up sense of space, sense of time. That's it. If we aren't concerning ourselves with the evaluation and the auditing of all experience, which is thought, then it begins to reveal itself quite elegantly on its own. And somehow it can be known. It's known, but not in this way. It's known. It's obvious. It's so literal and visceral. There's not even anything to say. And then we start to recognize why some traditions take vows of silence, because nothing to say, nothing to do. It's just obvious. So we keep it simple. I had what seems to be a medical thing happen to me yesterday. Extremely scary. It's been interesting to see how scared I am for the first time in a long time. Okay, this is good. Getting into fear. It's a really just powerful question. What is fear? What is it? What is that? A lot of people will start to identify thoughts like desperate or kind of like a escalation in the intensity of thought, and they might also identify a feeling. Here's a pointing that isn't always very satisfying. This seems to be the case, that the primary human experience, the one that seems to live at the base of everything, is something that is most often referred to or called fear. That's what it is. But that doesn't mean it is fear, and it doesn't mean it's something to avoid. It just seems that way to a mind that cannot reconcile it and what it can actually feel like. And so it feels maybe like in the stomach, something like a mycelium, like the fungus that grows underground before there's fruiting bodies of mushrooms, like these infinitely tiny fingers or threads reaching out into this void with nothing to contact. That's what it feels like. What's so bad about that? What does it do? We have to make an assumption around fear. We're blaming the experience for a potential outcome because the mind gives us a sense that fear leads to something that we really don't want. Prove it. And on a human level, of course, I hope everything's okay with you. And if you need anything, contact me. Let me know. I do hope you're well. But we're always okay. This existence seems absolutely inconsequential. The only consequences exist in the game. And this is what it kind of looks like. Here's your simple viewpoint of that. Okay, here's a mind, and the mind is wanting to create an economy. It's the game that it's playing. And to create the economy, it's minting its own currency, and its currency is thought. So the mind is sitting here just printing thoughts, printing money, printing thoughts, printing money. Now it has all this money in this currency. And then all of a sudden, it starts to become panicky over the fact that it thinks it's going to become bankrupt. It's printing its own money, and it's afraid that it's going to go bankrupt. That's the mind. That's funny. I mean, it's hilarious if you sit with that. There is no bankruptcy. There is no currency. All right, so I haven't really gotten into these. I'll go into an Angelo next. Here, this is going to be interesting too. To do an Angelo card, I don't know if there will be an insight that comes up, but we'll see. Ooh, I like this one. This one says, how to experience one thought without thinking about it. I mean, that right there that's an inquiry question. Yeah, exactly. Maybe that creates a little bit of a pause. Experience that thought without thinking about it. You know what actually reminds is I don't know if it ended up in a card. A really good question is, can you know a thought that you haven't had another thought about? Can you know a thought that you haven't had another thought about? What's the original thought? What's the original thought? What's the thought before that? What's the original thought? Can you know that thought without having another thought? Or experience one thought without thinking about it. These are so shiny, I have to do a little bit of an angle if you want to see it. Angelo gave me a special version of the cards that are all gold. Ooh, that's so funny. So special. Thoughts are just thoughts. If you are in a place now where there's a sense of battling thought, that's okay. Here's your reminder to realize that energetically there's no need to reject thought, because thought isn't interfacing actually with anything. Thought is thinking about itself. That's all they do. Thoughts think. That's literally it. So if you feel like maybe you have a sense of this already, it could be time to just allow the thought and bring attention to where there is no thought. And that's to essentially break the addiction. Bring attention to sensing and senses. And anything that feels, seems dense in experience, you'll see that the thought is essentially attempting to make a reference to that, because it seems like thoughts really like those intense sensations as a modality of stealing attention. It's a really powerful survival mechanism, actually. The experience of an intensity and then a thought spawning around that and attempting to categorize it, that right there is seems to be the crux of it all. So how thoroughly can you sit with what initially, and I'm stressing initially, feels strong, intense, overwhelming, and how deeply and fully can you allow it? Can you invite it to reach its maximum expression? And this may start verbally and ultimately become a nonverbal energetic engagement, something in intention, begging for more, begging for complete fullness of experience. All right, bye, Jennifer. Nice to see you. I really, really do appreciate you being here. Let's see. Connection maybe in and out. Let me know if it's okay. It's a thought that says there are thoughts, but thoughts can't say what they are without projecting more thoughts. I mean, a thought thinks a thought, but does it think itself or does it think another thought? That's really, look there. Do thoughts think other thoughts? Do thoughts think anything else? Is there anything else other than the thought in the thought? It's assuming, it's distorting something. All right. Some pretty good. As you engage, this is the way that attention seems to move. It's simply this. What remains? We could just sit with that. As you're exploring all this mind intensity, what remains? What remains? And again, rinse, repeat. What remains? What remains? What remains? What remains? What remains? What remains? Something like that. It's a good one. What stays? What's here? Do thoughts think themselves? Self-referential looping, iteration. Inquiry is usually, if we look at the nature of inquiry, it's one of the first experiences a lot of people have in terms of recursive experience, because thought seems to be inherently iterative. And there's something recursive in inquiry. And that, of course, reaches a threshold, because fundamentally, inquiry is still just thought. And so we keep swimming. We keep allowing the experience to self-penetrate. And the best way to kind of describe that is, why do we do an inside, what feels like an intrinsic experience? Because we're all toroidal, as is above, so is below. We are flowing in and out of ourselves simultaneously in a way that we couldn't really imagine. You can only feel. And somehow that is the same everywhere, that there actually is no buffer between. It's like a soup of fractals in and out. And so to flow in is to flow out, and to flow out is to flow in. But you'll see that the mind creates preference and it creates exclusivity. And that's the thing, is what we want to really start to do is break up a sense of exclusivity. And that's patterning. Well, I always do this. Okay, listen for those thoughts, and it's okay to express. Listen for those types of expressions. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of, or I always. Okay, good. As soon as you see that, that's a point of investigation, because it's attempting to create a sense of exclusivity and reify that through expression. It's just doing what it does. It's nothing to battle, because at some point we start to see the meta nature of thought too, that thought wants to essentially, at some point in this process, reject itself. And that's creating another form of exclusion, another reference point. As long as it's fulfilling its quota of creating exclusion and separation, then it'll reject itself. Interesting. One says, where is the sense of I after AWK, awakening? The center. What is the sense of I? Where's the sense of I? Anywhere. Just because there seems to be a preferred point of sensing doesn't mean that there's an I there, but it's a good place to explore. You can almost flip that question upside down, actually, to make it a little bit more revealing. Where isn't there a sense of I? Find where you are not in your experience. Where is there no sense of I? Oh man, that one pulls. Wow. Sarah says she didn't get her notification. It's probably because we had a technical glitch, and so I had to do another. Well, I actually ended up doing like 2 more lives to get it to finally work. But apparently the camera and the microphone weren't working, so hopefully we've ironed that out. Find where you are not in experience, truly though. Like, can you feel the effort of when experiencing, I mean, just visually even, or whatever, find where you are not in that, and you almost have to like force it. It's like forcing a sense of contrasting, and you feel that effort. That's an interesting one, at least in this moment. Somebody write that down. We'll make a card. It says, the quality of you is in objects in the visual field. The quality of you is in objects in the visual field. Find the you in the object. I mean, it's really the same pointing. For those of you who are still engaging with verbal inquiry, give yourself a little bit of room to flip the inquiry sometimes. In other words, who am I is a good one. Tends to be a very primary one. And you might find that the mind is really good at just coming up with answers there. Who am I? Well, and this, and this, and this. If you really want to kind of like pin the mind in a corner, though, you can ask something along the lines, which is flipping that inquiry of who am I to something like, how am I not myself? How am I not myself? Find the vacancy. And in that, you'll find that the mind, if it doesn't have the usual stimulation, it doesn't have an answer. And what does it do? It gets pretty quiet. And in that quietude, there's an obviousness that remains. What remains? What remains is that which is always right, like this. The here now isn't a space of experience, even though it may seem that way. The here now is an anti-space of experience. The way that the past seems to work in the mind is creating a space, an imaginary buffer, a container. In the future, same. And then we get concerned about the content, but here's the thing: is it's never all the content is made up in thought. That's what thought is primarily doing, is manufacturing content. But if you look closely, you'll see that thought actually there's a secret language of thought. There's a secret language of thought, and it's not in what the thoughts are saying. It's not in the language of words. It's in another language. What is the secret language of thought? Nice to see you, Reno. Thanks, man. Thanks for showing up at 4 a.m. your time. Xanax remains. What is the secret language of thought? What lies outside of happiness? What lies outside of happiness? I mean, that particular card can be really powerful if you sit with it. It's showing you something. In order to even consider it, we must allow something. What do you notice? What lies outside of happiness? What's the first thing that shows up? Put it in the chat. What do you notice when that question arises? What lies outside of happiness? Okay, this is good. Because I'm seeing answers: work, nothing. What is happiness in the first place? Good. Look closely with sitting with that, though. It's prompting something. Because what is outside of happiness? First of all, you have to be able to define what that is, and you have to consider in that question if this container of experience right here is happiness. Without the mind interfering, now we start looking for an outside. We have to consider that we're in the container of happiness in order to actually approach that inquiry. And then the mind, what is it doing? Is it's looking for data and it's looking for things to compare and contrast. But can you be outside of your container? Can you be outside of this experience? Can you be outside of this universe? Is there any eye on the outside looking in? You know, work, even nothing, even the question, what is happiness in the first place? Those are looking for objects. The prompt here, though, just as a reminder, it's not that anything is wrong or whatever, but the prompt is in experience now, apply that. Oh, what's outside of this bubble? Is it a bubble? I mean, there would have to be an outside, and you would have to imagine that outside. That's just more thought. Interesting. What if this is as good as it gets? What if it's always just been this? The allegory of the cave is just such a powerful pointing, because it's like we're being fed an entertainment stream in what seems like objects or form. But there's plenty more here. That's all. Any place we haven't looked is exactly the place to look. And here's what's most interesting about this. You do know the place to look, because you know your no. You know the no. If you know the no, that's where you go. Wow, I sound like Dr. Seuss. Oh yeah, I guess we can. If some people want to buy the Koan cards, I forgot about that. As we move, I'll put it in there actually. I'll put a link so that you guys can check them out. Anyway, looking at the time, we have a few more minutes. I'm just probably gonna quit at about 60 minutes in. Does anybody have anything burning in questions? What does the boundary of numbness feel like? What does feeling feel like? What does boundary mean? What is boundary? Find boundary. Find container. What's pain? Who's in the pain? Is there pain? Is it anything other than a signal? Does it have a quality? If it does, what quality does it have? Discomfort. What's the quality of discomfort? Is the quality of discomfort ever exactly the same? Or is it always a newly arising experience? Is the heuristic lazy by labeling it something that seems knowable and predictable? What if you got close enough, you realized it's brand new? Is it brand new? Is it always the same? What's the same? What's different? What's numbness? What's feeling? Are we ever numb? Are we ever not numb? Are we ever feeling? Are we ever not feeling? What remains? Wow, something's really popping today. Angelo card. Try to think about this exact moment right now. Is that possible? Even though we talk about it in a way that makes it seem like there's something like there is a moment, or there is like a container of eternity, when we examine, there's no moment. I mean, it's not like a thing. It's not like we're not standing on the moment. Somehow there's no threshold here. So think about this exact moment right now. Is that even possible? Is that even possible to think about this exact moment? Maybe. This is kind of fun. Man, how fun. How fun. Oh, since we're about to go, here, I'm going to put in, if you guys want the Angelo Koan cards, there's the link I think I can also put them in the other part. We have some left. They did so pretty quickly, but we do have some left. Oh, also, somebody said, do you ever do discounts? So I said, why not? So let me see. There's a discount code. I think you guys get like $10 off. You have to buy, if you buy 2 decks, you get $10 off of each deck, I think is what the thing said. It's this right here. That's the code. So funny. This is not about selling anything, but since you guys asked, it's really nice to sit with all of you and do a live. It's been a while. I would like to do this. Why not do it more often? Maybe weekly. We'll just sit and get into it. And even though it's not quite like at satsang face to face, there's elements here, and maybe some of the questions that you've wanted to ask you can get into. And it seems like there's been some interesting insights from everyone actually at this point. So yeah, the link is there for whoever asked. Let me just see. Thanks for being online. You're welcome. Glad you're here. Hope you're all right. Let me know if you need anything. I find it easy to get lost using words as approximate heuristics for things that are inherently beyond words all the time. I mean, really, it's all beyond words. It's okay to make approximations, though. We don't need to take a stand of exclusivity. Let me just give you the quickest definition of Zen stink. Zen stink is essentially moving so fully into the absolute that we actually end up taking a stance in the absolute. That's all. There is nowhere to stand here. It forms itself. It pulls us, guides us. It's almost like being guided by a divine hand or something. And we're just along for the ride. So even words are fine. And it's okay to speak, and it's okay to use the word I. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a way to communicate. Let's see. I don't know what this says. I don't think so. If you were mind identified, you are referring to a thought that is in memory. It feels like we are a millisecond lagging. Yeah, I'm not sure what. Maybe there was a question that I asked, but yes, the thoughts are always late to the party, it seems. I'm in an intro to Buddhism class, and our main assignments are definitions of critical terms. Well, yeah, that's okay. That's a good definition. All right. Well, how powerful. And maybe we'll just do one more Angelo card before we roll. And this is what you can sit. Oh, so appropriate too. This is what you can sit with for the rest of your exploration. Describe presence without using language. Describe presence without using language. And with that, my friends, much gratitude. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you soon. Bye.